I want you to picture this for a moment. You're in your junior year of college, studying, hanging out with new friends, and jumping into the dating pool. For one young woman, it was her very first romance. She and her boyfriend liked to go to the movies, play video games together, talk about art, and make plans for their future. But you never know what the people closest to you might be hiding, even when you do everything in your power to try to stay safe. Sometimes evil has no boundaries. Deadly Deep Dives. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Kimbyrleigha, and if you've never been here before, it's nice to finally meet you. This case has so many twists and turns. It is truly shocking, and that's why I wanted to bring it to you today. But as usual, before we get into it, I would like to take a moment to thank today's sponsor that's making this video possible. Today's sponsor is one of our loyal ones, and that is PDS Debt. With a new baby coming, and she is going to be here any minute now, we have a lot of new expenses, and it's so easy to get into credit card debt, but getting out of it, not so much. I should know it's happened to me, and it happened fast. And the system is set up so that we don't get out of debt. So if you're struggling with credit cards, personal loans, collections, or medical bills, you need to check out PDS Debt. They have customized options to help you get out of debt, and they roll all of your payments into one low monthly payment that can be much more manageable. That's how I was able to get out of debt, and that's why I'm sharing it with you. Plus, PDS Debt is a top-rated company on Google, has an A+ rating on the Better Business Bureau, so if you're making payments every month on your debt and your balances are not going down, this program's for you. Everyone with $10,000 or more in eligible debt qualifies, and there's no minimum credit score required. Bad and fair credit is accepted. So save thousands on interest and fees and pay off your debt in a fraction of the time. PDS Debt cares about helping you get out of debt. So check out all their reviews and see how many mention PDS Debt employees by name. It's incredible. So to get that free debt analysis right now only takes 30 seconds. Just go to pdsdebt.com/Kimber. That's pdsdebt.com/KIMBYR. And thanks so much to PDS Debt for being a loyal supporter of this channel. Now let's get into the video for today. Now let me introduce you to Samantha Michelle Nance. She was born on April 7th of 1989 in Italy, Texas. She was the youngest daughter of Sam and Cynthia Nance. Samantha actually went by her middle name Michelle, which they shortened to Shelley, and her parents thought she was so special from the day she was born. Sam and Cynthia already had two older daughters, Rachel and Shauna, who were bright, bubbly, and stubborn. When Cynthia had Rachel, she was in labor for almost 16 hours, and Shauna's labor lasted 14 hours. But baby Shelley was so excited to meet her new family, her mom said, that Cynthia almost gave birth right in the hospital parking lot. Wow, that is intense. If you're a mom, let me know how long your labor was with your children. Mine was 22 hours before I had an emergency C-section with my daughter Shyla 13 years ago. And my due date for this baby is the end of June, so we'll see. But going back to the case, of course, little Shelley was a shy, quiet kid raised in a large Baptist family. She had 17 aunts and uncles. She was independent, and she spent time drawing, reading, and watching movies and playing video games in her room. In elementary school, Shelley was known to be creative and smart. She wasn't athletic at all. But when it came to art, she was the star of the show. There was one time Shelley drew a picture of a butterfly for her art class, and it was such a wonderful drawing that all the other girls in her class wanted Shelley to draw them butterflies. When Shelley got home from school, she ran to her mom, all excited, and she said, "When I grow up, I want to be an artist." Now, Italy, Texas, this was a charming little town with a lot of character. In the 1990s and 2000s, it was known for tourist attractions like the world's largest caterpillar, which was actually a manufacturing facility with a painted-on face and a UFO-shaped restaurant called the Starship Pegasus. Sounds pretty cool, but it has since closed down. But as charming as this town was, like most small towns, there wasn't a lot to do for kids, so they had to make their own fun. Shelley's older sisters, Rachel and Shauna, they were a bit of more of party girls. They like to go out. They're very social and older than her. And like typical teenagers, they were enjoying their newfound independence, goofing off, driving around town, But Shelley was different. She was a homebody. She was in her element when she was just alone at home, and she preferred to chat on the phone with friends and spend time on her computer. She would blog and she would work on her art. Then when Shelley got into high school, she would have her best friends come over every day to play video games. They would jump on the trampoline, they would roll batons, and they would post on DeviantArt. This is an online platform for artists, and I remember this site. I don't know if you do, but Shelley's DeviantArt platform was Flutterby727, where she posted mixed media art and writing. And then she had a different account called Butterfly Flutter 727. So you could tell that butterflies pretty much became her brand. Shelley was known for drawing butterflies, of course, and fairies, angels, anything that had wings. And she loved capturing trees, ethereal landscapes, and women with long flowing hair. When she wasn't drawing, she was fascinated with computers and coding. She liked horror films and anime, fantasy worlds, poetry, and prose. She also had a personal website, which she coded all by herself. I'm actually going to link Shelley's website below in case you want to check it out later, but I'm going to be showing some of it up on the screen. She created some truly imaginative projects. Do you remember the Choose Your Own Adventure books that were really popular in the early 2000s? I know my mom read them to me when I was little and I loved them. Well, Shelley was actually working on a Choose Your Own Adventure video game where a young woman named Lucy gets in a car crash with her brother in the wilderness, and Lucy loses track of her brother, and she has to find him in this monster-ridden town called Silent Hill. And you choose how you react to different scenarios and solve these puzzles to help Lucy find her brother and escape this town before it's too late. I read through her website. She was extremely talented, especially at such a young age. Shelley was always working on something new, and her teachers at Italy High School recognized this, and they encouraged Shelley to branch out even more and do bigger and bigger things. In her senior year of high school, one of Shelley's art teachers suggested that she enter a contest that was being sponsored by the Art Institute of Dallas. Now, at first, Shelley wasn't planning to submit anything because she was very humble, and she also had imposter syndrome. But she submitted a piece anyway. Here it is on the screen. I have to say, very colorful, mysterious, imaginative, great composition. Shelley pressed send on her submission and promptly forgot that she'd even done it. However, not too long after this, Shelley was home with her mom. She was just going through checking her email as usual, and she saw this message in her inbox with the title, "Congratulations," and she opened it, and she sat there in shock. She had won the state competition. Not only did Shelley receive a $13,000 scholarship to attend the Art Institute of Dallas, but her piece would also be automatically submitted to a national competition. So Shelley was overjoyed, but she was also overwhelmed. She told her mom that she actually felt like she was going to have a heart attack and die from shock. It's just not what she expected. But for Shelley, this was proof that if you put yourself out there, the sky really is the limit. And her art received 4th place in the national competition, which is pretty amazing. Shelley graduated high school in 2007, and she could not wait to go off to college. Of course, she loved and would miss her family, but her sister Rachel was now married. She was a mom, and Shelley became an aunt. But Shelley was tired of the high school drama. Her yearbook quote actually read, "You laugh at me because I'm different. I laugh at you because you're all the same." And I have seen that been written before, but this rang true. Shelley thought out of the box, ahead of the curve. She was ambitious and a free spirit. She wanted to be a big name artist one day. Even though the thought of competing at a high level made her anxious, she was optimistic that her hard work would pay off. And Shelley was always 100% herself. She wasn't interested in getting into a relationship, tattoos, piercings, alcohol, or doing drugs. She was modest and didn't go with the flow. She was excited to go off to the Art Institute of Dallas because she knew she would connect with people that were like her there, even if it was over an hour away from her home. Shelley majored in media arts and animation with a focus in anime. She wanted to animate movies or video games, and one day move out to Hollywood, California to work in the entertainment industry, maybe for a company like Pixar or other big animators. When she got to the Art Institute, she quickly found herself in a very large group of friends where everyone started to admire her. Shelley cared about getting good grades, and though physically she was small in stature, Shelley's art was an iceberg. There was so much going on beneath the surface that it really made you want to get to know her more. Shelley and her friends loved to do things like cosplay. They would go to anime conventions. And Shelley even learned how to sew and do embroidery work to make her very own costumes. She was really into Japanese fantasy role-playing video games like Final Fantasy and Persona, as well as horror games like Fatal Frame, Resident Evil 4, and she made her closest friends through the hours and hours she would spend gaming. After her sophomore year in college, Shelley spent the summer back at home with her parents. She had her wisdom teeth removed, which went smoothly. While she was healing, she made her mom watch the first Twilight movie. Remember that movie? They both loved vampires. Shelley posted her mom's reactions on the DeviantArt site, and they had so much fun just making fun of Edward and Bella's facial expressions. And then July 2009 came around. Shelley went to see the movies Orphan and Harry Potter and Half-Blood Prince in theaters, rating them all highly because those were the type of movies that she enjoyed. However, as much as Shelley had been excited about initially going off to college, she was now kind of dreading going back to school. It's because she never felt like she had enough time in a semester to create art the way she could when she had free time in the summers and the winters. Shelley would actually be taking a class in sculpture that semester, and she decided to move in with a roommate. Her name was Ashley Olvera. Now, Ashley was a shy social animation student, and just like Shelley, she was also 20 years old. She was from a small town too called Taft, Texas, and Shelley and Ashley shared a second-floor apartment at an apartment complex called The Falls. It was a nice place. In the daytime, that is. It had a private pool. A lot of the people that lived there were students, but it actually wasn't the safest area near Dallas, especially for a young woman. And it was even worse at night. Shelley was used to living in a small town. She wasn't fully aware of the dangers when she signed the lease. But most, like I said, of the people that were living there were art students, including some of Shelley's friends. So she felt safe. I don't know about you, but my dad always taught me to go to the area you're interested in living in, go at night, go during the weekends, go during the day when people are at work, and really pay attention. See what the neighbors are like. Is it loud there? Is it dangerous? You just never know. And so you see it at different points of the day or the week. And realtors can hide that from you. They can have an open house when they know the neighborhood is going to be quiet and everything's going to look fine. So go watch The Watcher on Netflix. If you know, you know. But Shelley was like many naive and very excited college students. So, like I said, she felt very secure living there. Shelley's friend Nathan was also coming around a lot more, which probably made her feel even more secure, especially because he was becoming more than a friend. For the very first time, Shelley told her mom there was a guy in the picture. She actually just said, "Hey, by the way, Mom, I have a boyfriend." And Cynthia was surprised because Shelley was not really the type to focus her time and energy on boys. So she was like, "Really?" And Shelley explained, "Yeah, I've known this guy a couple years now, and we hung out a lot and we decided to be exclusive." Now, a lot of guys actually showed interest in Shelley at this point. What drew them into her was that she knew a lot about video games and the process that goes on behind the scenes, how to create them. And this impressed a lot of the guys that she hung out with in her social circle. This was a big change for Shelley since high school when she used to sit at the back of the class alone and quietly focus on her schoolwork. But she was drawn to Nathan. And even though she confided in her mom, Shelley wasn't going around telling everyone that her and Nathan were getting together as more than just friends yet, because it was still new. But by June, they announced that they were official. Shelley had actually met Nathan her freshman year at the Art Institute. They worked on a project together and had a bunch of mutual friends, but they'd been more platonic until the summer of 2009. Nathan Schuck was from the Dallas suburbs, and he was known for being shy at first, but transforming into an energetic and fun guy once he opened up to you. Nathan was artistic. He loved movies and video games just as much as Shelley did, and they both had a great sense of humor And he was also studying animation. He really loved action fantasy, definitely things like ninjas. He even had his own ninja costumes that were very intricate. He was slender with tattoos, sometimes had the long hair and a lip piercing, and he'd grown up with his mom and his grandma, so he was very comfortable with his masculinity. Shelley was Nathan's very first relationship as well. So you know how first romances are, where you're shy and you hang out, you hold hands, you stare at each other, just excited to be with somebody new and do something new. But you're also not sure if they're the one because you don't have experience dating. Shelley and Nathan were cautious, but they knew they cared for one another. Shelley introduced Nathan to her sister Shauna as her friend, but like a big sister would, Shauna knew immediately that Shelley was smitten. Even though she insisted, oh, we're just friends, Shelley would blush. She would hold her head to one side and laugh at all of Nathan's jokes, even the ones that weren't funny. So Shauna knew, and she approved of Nathan. She thought he was funny and nice, and she knew that Shelley really liked him. But she had no clue they were officially dating. They practically were at that point, title or not at the time. While Shelley was open with her mom about Nathan, she did not tell her dad about him. She didn't think that her dad would like Nathan's tattoos and his piercings, and I feel that. And Shelley wanted to make sure their friendship came before the relationship, so she took things slow. Now, fall semester came around, and Nathan and Shelley had been dating for a couple months at this time. And on the 5th and 6th of September 2009, which was a Saturday and Sunday that week, the couple went to an anime convention out in Dallas together. In the beginning, they did more with their entire friend group, but as the relationship progressed, they found themselves wanting to do things together alone. Shelley had made her own costumes, and they were having the time of their lives. It was a great break from classes, and since it was Labor Day weekend, Nathan planned to go back home afterward to visit his grandmother since he didn't have class until Thursday. So it was nice to spend some time with Shelley before parting ways for a few days. Now, Shelley didn't have class until Friday morning, so she too was looking forward to a nice break so she could work on a lot of the projects she had been putting off or not had time to do. But what's interesting is Shelley had this weird, bad gut feeling, and she couldn't exactly put her finger on it, but she had this nightmare that she felt like was a premonition. And she actually told her dad, Sam, about it. She said she thought that something didn't feel right and that she might be in danger. Of course, her dad was reassuring her that she was fine and she was probably just stressed out with school. But I have to say, I personally take those feelings very seriously. However, you just don't really know if it's anxiety or if it's something more. Now, every year, the Nance family would take a family vacation together. But now that Shelley's sister Rachel had her own family and Shauna was out of the house and Shelley was in college, Sam and Cynthia were empty nesters and they were ready to take their first solo vacation without their kids. They were really looking forward to it. They planned this 1,400-mile trip to Yellowstone National Park in Wyoming, and it's such a beautiful place to visit to see the geysers and the wildlife. So on Thursday, September 10th, a few days following Shelley attending that anime convention, her parents, Sam and Cynthia, packed up their car and texted their daughters individually saying, "We're leaving Texas now," and that they love them. Now, Rachel and Shauna responded right away, saying, "Have a good time, be careful." It was normal in their family to reply with, at the very least, a thumbs up, even if you were busy, just to let the person know you received the message. But Shelley was silent. At this point, Sam and Cynthia weren't concerned because Shelley was known to stay up really late into the early morning hours. She was a night owl. She liked to stay up in the quiet of the night to work on her sketches, and then she would sleep in really late the next day. Her school semester was really challenging, and after spending the weekend with Nathan at the convention, her parents thought that she was probably really exhausted. Now, since Shelley didn't have class on Thursday, she might sleep until, who knows, like 3 p.m. for all they knew, especially since Shelley took a prescription sleep aid regularly to calm herself down so she could get a good night's sleep. It made her very drowsy. So Sam and Cynthia, knowing all this, drove up through Texas, Oklahoma, and Colorado. But they still hadn't heard from Shelley. And that evening, Cynthia and Sam got worried. It was really unusual for Shelley to not check her phone or respond for 12 hours. But since they're now on vacation and they're busy settling in, Sam and Cynthia vowed to just relax and check on their daughter in the morning. Now, Friday morning, the 11th of September rolled around. By now, Sam and Cynthia were already in Wyoming when Cynthia decided to track down her daughter. She didn't have Shelley's roommate, Ashley's phone number, so she called the Art Institute. Cynthia knew that Shelley had class at 8:30 on Friday mornings, and since she still hadn't been able to reach Shelley, she wanted to check in and see if Shelley was in class. Now, the person that answered the phone said they couldn't leave their desk at that moment and interrupt Shelley's class, but they also wrongly assumed that Shelley was your stereotypical student who would miss messages, get too busy, not call people back, and maybe even skip class. But they did promise that when Shelley's class got out, they would find someone who could track her down and let her know her parents were looking for her. Cynthia was, of course, frustrated. She told Sam maybe they should turn back around and drive back home. She was that worried. But they'd already come so far on their trip that if Shelley was okay, it didn't make sense to panic. Cynthia called Shauna and Rachel, asking if either one of them had heard from their younger sibling. Shauna told her mom not to worry, that Shelley was 20. She was independent. She was a busy college student. But Sam and Cynthia just felt tense as Sam continued driving on the interstate. They just couldn't really enjoy themselves, which is completely understandable. Cynthia received another call, and this time it was from the Art Institute. It turned out that Shelley had not shown up for class. Now, this was not like her. She never skipped her classes. The school had gotten in contact with Ashley Olvera, which was Shelley's roommate, and asked Ashley to go check on Shelley. Now, Sam got a bad feeling at this point. He thought about turning around, and I'm sure, especially since Shelley had told him about that premonition. But the school official had said to Shelley's parents that Ashley didn't think anything was wrong. Ashley told the Institute that sometimes she didn't see Shelley for a day or two because they were both so busy. So it was possible that maybe Shelley just overslept and didn't make it to class. Sam continued to drive for the time being until they could figure out what was going on. Meanwhile, Ashley tells her and Shelley's mutual friend, Gilberto Perez, who was in the same class that she was at the time that morning in her 9 o'clock class, that Shelley's parents hadn't spoken to her in over 24 hours and she missed her class that day. Gilberto and Ashley decided to go over there and check on Shelley. But first, Gilberto had to stop at his place to grab something, so he told Ashley he would be over right afterward. They left the school. They went their separate ways for their lunch break. Before Ashley had left that morning to go to her 9 a.m. class on that Friday, nothing seemed wrong. She and Shelley shared a bathroom, but they had separate rooms, and it was normal for Shelley to just be sleeping in the early morning. So that afternoon, on September 11th, Ashley walked up the stairs to her apartment at the Falls and opened the door with her key. When she stepped inside, she tossed down her things, she turned left into the living room, and then she went to Shelley's door. Now, Shelley had two doors. One faced the living room, and then there was one leading into their shared bathroom. Both of the doors were shut. So Ashley knocked on Shelley's bedroom door before she just opened it. She wanted to let Shelley know that she was going to come in, but there was no response. So Ashley was determined to make sure her friend was okay. So she opened the door slowly. She was calling out Shelley's name, wondering if she was just asleep. And that's when she saw Shelley. And she, in fact, appeared to be sleeping. She was on the bed, laying on her stomach, and her toes were kind of poking out from underneath the comforter. But she wasn't moving. And her toes looked unnaturally pale to Ashley. So she opened the door even further. She turned on the light and she said, "Hey, Shelley, are you okay?" But Shelley didn't move. Ashley then went over to the bed and she shook Shelley's shoulder. That's when the comforter slightly fell off in the process, and she noticed a dark substance had soaked through the back of Shelley's shirt and the bed sheets underneath her. Ashley touched Shelley's arm, and it was cold. Then Ashley, she's now hysterical. She's calling out Shelley's name, and she wasn't conscious. Ashley rushes out of the room, and instead of calling 911, she calls Gilberto. Now, he had just gotten to the door of his own apartment at the time. He picked up his phone, and Ashley was hyperventilating, saying something about Shelley being covered in blood and that she thinks she's dead. Gilberto rushed to get over there, and he was shocked at what he witnessed. He too saw Shelley and said that her hair was so blood-soaked, it looked red. It was obvious that she was deceased, so he told Ashley to call 911 right away, so that's what she did. Well, that's everything that Ashley said that she did when she relayed this information to the dispatcher. First responders from the Dallas Police Department arrived, and it was clear from the scene right away that Shelley had been a victim of a homicide. Once the thicker comforter was pulled back, it was apparent that Shelley had been stabbed multiple times, and she seemed to have been targeted while she slept. Detective Jason Jindrat was in charge of processing the crime scene, and the primary investigator assigned to the case was homicide detective Paul Elzie. He had worked for the Dallas PD for 36 years, but that day he had no idea what to expect. All the dispatcher told them was that they were going to a scene of a female victim of a homicide, but this case would turn out to be one of those ones that stuck with him. When the investigators arrived, Detective Jindrat noticed that Shelley was lying face down on her now blood-soaked bed, still wearing her underwear and an old t-shirt which functioned as pajamas. There were no immediate signs of a struggle around the bed or the room, so they figured that Shelley was caught by surprise, with no way to defend herself or even prepare herself or even know what was going to happen. She was just asleep when this violent attack occurred. It was described as a bloody and horrific scene because there was blood everywhere, and there was obvious blunt force trauma to Shelley in addition to stab wounds. Both the detectives knew that stabbings are usually much more personal than other types of homicides. So their theory to begin with was to look at those people that were closest to Shelley who could possibly be upset with her. But who would be angry at this kind, shy art student who kept to herself? Detective Elzie had a 20-year-old daughter himself, and he couldn't stop imagining Shelley as his own child. That was really difficult. Sometimes we forget that these investigators are human and they have emotions. And like I said, this case stuck with him. From what could be gathered from just examining the condition of her body, it appeared that Shelley had been dead for quite a bit of time, as in, this didn't just happen, not even that day or even that morning. Rigor mortis was still present, but to get a more accurate timeline, they started to look through her phone. They looked at her text messages, and they also wanted to find out when she accessed her laptop last and when it was turned off. They narrowed down the timeline that she could have been killed to between about 6 a.m. and 11 a.m. on Thursday morning, so the morning before, which was around the same time her parents had tried to reach her, saying that they were leaving for vacation. As her body was being removed so that it could be transported for a formal ID and an autopsy, the evidence around Shelley was being collected for analysis, including her bedding. But while they were moving her, the crime scene technicians noticed something that seemed out of place. There was a small 1/4-inch piece of blue material that appeared to be some kind of like synthetic or rubber material. It was on Shelley's left hand, and it didn't seem consistent with any items in the bed or around the room. They wondered if this item had somehow come from the apartment or Shelley's room, or if the perpetrator had brought something with them and accidentally left this behind. As they went through the rest of the apartment, the detectives made several observations. First, there was no signs of forced entry. They looked at the front door, the windows, and the patio balcony. However, the door to the patio was unlocked, so they wondered, had someone brazenly climbed to the second story and snuck in up there? Crime scene technicians dusted for fingerprints on the patio, and they found 2 latent prints on the inside of the door. As for the front door, no sign of a break-in, and Ashley swore the front door was locked on Thursday and Friday when she left, and no one else lived with them. There was nothing missing from Shelley's room, the living room, or the bathroom, and they didn't find a knife that was consistent with the weapon they believe would cause the wounds to Shelley. But there were 2 knives missing from a knife block in the kitchen. The knives would have been a steak knife and a large cutting knife. However, in that shared bathroom, they found a small drop of blood on the edge of the sink and a smear on the cabinet door under the sink. There was also a more diluted smear on the bathtub, which was wet from someone, maybe Ashley or even the perpetrator, taking a shower. They swabbed the blood for DNA, dusted the sink area for fingerprints, and they found several prints on the medicine cabinet. While investigators were working on the scene, Shelley's parents were currently out in a very remote area of Wyoming where the phone reception was not good. And that's when Cynthia gets a call from the Art Institute. She can barely make out what the caller's saying, but she heard Shelley had been found in blood. She had no idea what that was supposed to mean. And before she could ask, the call dropped. So she turned to her husband. She told him what the caller told her and asked what it meant. And Sam looked over at her and said, "It means Shelley is dead." All Cynthia could do was scream. It was like her heart had stopped from shock. Sam said it felt like someone kicked him in the guts and then pulled them outside of his body. He knew he had to turn around and he had to drive back to Texas, but he couldn't find anywhere to pull off the interstate at that time. Sam's mind was jumping to conclusions. He was wondering what happened. Was his daughter robbed? He thought, no, she couldn't have been robbed. She didn't even have that much money. Okay, so was she sexually violated, he wondered. At the same time, Cynthia was on the phone trying to call back, but she couldn't get service. She wondered if there could have been anything they could do to prevent this. Hundreds of thoughts were flying through their minds. But the one thing they knew for sure was that they had to get to their daughter and fast. They had a long road ahead of them back to Texas. Finally, when they were able to turn the car around, reach a better place for reception, Cynthia called the Dallas Police Department. And that's when they confirmed the tragic news that Shelley had been murdered. Sam was going as fast as he could down the highway, but there was no way they were going to make it by that evening. So Cynthia called her daughter, Shauna. She lived in the Dallas area, and she told Shauna her sister had been murdered and that she needed to go to the crime scene to begin answering the police's questions. Of course, Shauna was in shock. You don't expect to get a phone call like that. She fell to the floor, and she said that she felt like she had been shot. For a while, she couldn't do anything. She couldn't even form a sentence. She was wondering why Shelley, someone who had no enemies, never left her room, why would she be the target of a killer? It is heartbreaking for a family to find out like this. Phone calls like this are ones you will never forget. Shauna arrived at the Falls apartment complex and she saw the crime scene tape and police. They were currently using golf carts to investigate this entire property and using search dogs in garbage cans and dumpsters, hoping to find the murder weapon or weapons. Shauna walked towards the officers, and before she knew it, she was just yelling Shelley's name over and over again. She was demanding to know what happened, but the investigators couldn't really give her much information. Once she told them who she was, that she was family, the investigators said they needed to know all about Shelley, her closest friends, and her inner circle. Shauna mentioned that Ashley would have been the person closest to Shelley since they lived together, and she also knew her sister had been seeing a fellow student named Nathan. The investigators already had their immediate suspicions about Ashley, actually. It was her demeanor, the fact that she didn't call 911 right away, but also they found it odd that she claimed to have been using the shared bathroom that morning, and somehow she didn't notice any blood. Besides, the simple truth is that anyone who alerts the police to a crime is a potential suspect, and she and Shelley were roommates, which gave Ashley access to Shelley and the apartment. Detective Elsie asked Ashley to come to the station for an interview, and in the meantime, they called the Art Institute to get Nathan's information, including his phone number, so they could contact him as well. Now, I do have footage of Ashley's interview with Detective Elsie. She's wearing a long sleeve red crew neck and glasses, and her shoulders are kind of hunched forward, and she's speaking calmly. And that stuck out to Elsie. It seemed too calm for someone who just found their roommate and friend murdered. She seemed to lack the appropriate emotion. She was more matter of fact when she was describing how she found Shelley. She was like, I came straight to the apartment, checked on her, and she was dead. And she was covered in blood. And that was it. But what was even more odd to the detective was that Ashley had been in that apartment for more than 24 hours and hadn't noticed that her roommate had been brutally stabbed and killed just steps away in the next room. I mean, I know me, most of you, we're basically detectives from everything that we've seen and watched in these videos. So I think we would notice, but everyone's different. Everyone grieves different, they process information differently, but Elsie pressed her about her claim that it wasn't unusual for her to go even 3 whole days without hearing or seeing Shelley. Still, Ashley insisted that's not unusual between them. She said, I know it sounds weird. And Elsie agreed. He's like, it sounds very weird. Elsie asked Ashley about Thursday night. And Ashley explained that even though Shelley was in her bedroom and she didn't actually see her, that sometimes Shelley didn't leave her room for days on end. She would put her headphones on, she would slip into her own little art world. So Ashley just assumed Shelley was around. Okay, I understand that. But if they shared a bathroom, what I wondered was, would she not notice there was no sound of like a toilet flushing that whole time or the shower running? But I guess being a busy college student, maybe those things would easily go unnoticed. You tell me. However, Elsie treated Ashley like a suspect because of what he was about to show her. Something that he thought would have been nearly impossible for her not to notice. The blood. If Ashley woke up on Friday morning suspecting that nothing was wrong, how did she not see the blood in the sink or in the other places in the apartment? Elsie told Ashley that there's a blood spot right there on the tub, and he's showing her a picture. And Ashley acted surprised. She's like, what? And then he shows her the picture of the sink. And he says, there's blood right here in the sink. There's blood in the kitchen. And he literally tells her, you'd have to walk around that apartment blind and not see nothing. Now, to be fair, the pictures were blown up, so the blood looked a lot more obvious. This was a tiny droplet of blood. At this point, Ashley changes her story, though. She replied saying she didn't see the blood on the trash can or the refrigerator, but she remembered seeing that little spot of blood on the sink when she was leaving for school. He's like, you still didn't think of knocking on Shelley's door? And Ashley's like, no. That's when he tells her that this looks terrible for her. She's got her head down on the table now, and Elsie leaves the room, so he gives Ashley some time alone to think about everything that she's done and everything that she's said so far. To play devil's advocate, there are definitely some very innocent reasons to have blood in a bathroom. Okay, I can think of a nosebleed. I can think of a woman on her period in the middle of the night. Maybe you don't notice. I mean, I've cut myself shaving and it looked like I had stabbed someone. It isn't impossible for a roommate to assume that there's an innocent reason that there's a little bit of blood on the sink or the tub, if she had even seen it. But now Elsie was convinced that if Ashley didn't ask Shelley if she was okay, then these girls probably didn't have a really close relationship. And at that point, since Shelley's clothing was still on her, there was no evidence of a sexual crime, which meant that this crime could have been committed by a female perpetrator. Maybe the two girls weren't close at all. So when Elsie came back to the room, he asked Ashley if she and Shelley had ever gotten into fights. Now, Ashley said, of course, she had disagreements with Shelley, but they weren't fights. And she explained that she liked to be social. Shelley liked to keep to herself. So they had very different types of lives. They were different people, and they didn't always see eye to eye. Elsie asked about Shelley's relationships. He was wondering if Ashley and Shelley maybe liked the same guy, had feelings for the same guy, wanted to date him, were dating the same person. And Ashley said, no, Shelley had been dating Nathan for the last couple months. Elsie asked questions to find out whether Ashley was maybe jealous of Shelley because maybe she liked Nathan, but Ashley insisted that was not the case. She did add that Shelley had only dated Nathan. There were no other men in Shelley's life in the past romantically. Ashley described Nathan and Shelley's relationship as a high school crush, but she did say that Nathan was known to have anger issues. She told the detective a mutual friend apparently told Ashley that you would never want to see Nathan angry, ever, because when Nathan was focused on his video games, he would go into a rage and pop off of the screen. So he probably did the same thing in real life. But I have to beg to differ on that. I mean, we're talking about video games, but still, Ashley wanted to give any and all information that she knew to the detectives. Now, Detective Elsie made a mental note of that and then took a really accusatory tone towards Ashley. He wanted to draw out a confession from her. He was thinking that maybe she's trying to shift the focus onto Nathan. And I understand that officers do what they have to do. But at this point, Ashley is crying. She's insisting she has nothing to do with her friend's murder. Elsie replied that he really believed something terrible happened between the two girls and she just wasn't telling him. But she insisted again she was telling the truth. But he didn't believe her. He blatantly asked her why she did it. And Ashley said she would never hurt Shelley. Elsie said he could prove that Ashley had committed this crime because of the lack of forced entry. He said Ashley was the only one that could have been responsible, and her future was not looking good. That's pretty extreme because we still know that they haven't ruled out the fact that someone could have crawled up the balcony, but I understand that he's trying to put pressure on her. At the very least, it appeared as though Ashley could be hiding something and trying to pin the blame on Nathan. But maybe she was telling the truth. At this point, Elsie does not have enough probable cause to make an arrest, but he also didn't think that Ashley was going to be a flight risk because she's halfway through her semester. She's a student. She's cooperating with them. But they did check her body for injuries. Considering how brutal this murder was, they thought they might find some wounds on the perpetrator, but they didn't find any wounds on her. She also willingly provided a DNA sample, and then they let her go. After this interview, Elsie spoke to Shelley's sister, Shauna. She actually had the heartbreaking task of identifying Shelley, while Sam and Cynthia were still driving from Wyoming to Texas. Now, on the phone, Cynthia told Elsie that Shelley didn't have enemies, but she did have a casual boyfriend named Nathan. Cynthia said something else, and it's something that caught the attention of the detective. She said that Shelley told her in the weeks before the murder that she didn't actually think her relationship with Nathan was going anywhere. Just that previous month in August, when Shelley was visiting, she asked her mom for advice on how to end things with Nathan. This was her first real relationship, remember? Cynthia told her to be honest. Just say it's nothing that Nathan was doing wrong. It's just her own feelings. Shelley admitted to her mom she didn't feel the same emotions that she felt that Nathan felt for her. He was head over heels for her, and she knew that he would not take this news very well. Elsie now wondered if Nathan had found out Shelley wasn't interested in him, and that could have given him a motive to hurt her. He could have gone off the deep end, become possessive, and then snapped. By this time, the word that a student had been murdered had spread all over campus. Students at the Art Institute, especially those who lived in the Falls complex, were terrified. Now, because of this, the school actually moved all of the students to a new apartment complex in a safer area of Dallas, especially while this investigation was ongoing and a killer was on the loose. Shelley's friends from high school were hit really hard with the news. Allison Green said she screamed in disbelief, and Shelley's friend Stephanie Johnson remembered getting that call, telling her that Shelley was dead, and she fell to the ground in tears. They all leaned on one another for support, and a fundraiser was started in her name. They were even making a plan to plant a tree as a living memorial to Shelley on their high school campus. By later that same afternoon, Nathan had arrived at the Falls apartment complex. A mutual friend of Shelley and Nathan named Chris Phillips had been watching the news that morning, and he heard that a young woman had been murdered at the complex, and he was in a panic. He was worried that it was Ashley or Shelley. Chris drove around to talk about it with friends. He picked a few of them up and even stopped by Lake Highlands apartment complex where Nathan lived to grab him before heading over to the Falls to see what happened. While they were driving over, Chris gets a phone call from Shelley's friend Jeremy Eldridge. He also lived at the Falls. Jeremy informed Chris that it was indeed Shelley that had been killed. And there was Chris driving his car with Shelley's boyfriend Nathan in the passenger seat. He had no idea how he was going to tell him. So somehow he relays that concern to Jeremy, hands the phone to Nathan so that Jeremy could do it. And Chris watched Nathan's face as he learned that his girlfriend had been murdered. Nathan was overcome with all types of emotions. He looked like he was going through worry, denial, anger, and grief. He just looked broken. When they all arrived at the Falls, Chris and Nathan didn't know what to do. So they went to Shelley's apartment and they knocked on her door. Of course, they weren't allowed inside. And at that point, Ashley was being interviewed by police at the station. Feeling lost and confused, the friends went to Jeremy's apartment and they sat in silence in his living room until they heard a knock on Jeremy's door. It was the police. One of them took Nathan by the arm and forcefully yanked him right out of that apartment and outside. Now, that definitely made Nathan look guilty, but Chris didn't know whether to believe that Nathan was capable of a crime like this. Him and Nathan were really close. The friends just watched Nathan talking to the officers in the parking lot and then leaving in a law enforcement vehicle. During Nathan's interview, which I also have parts of to play for reference, Elsie noticed Nathan was pretty small. He appeared meek. He didn't come off as a killer. But we know looks don't mean anything. And Elsie began playing bad cop once again. He asked about Nathan and Shelley's relationship, what they did together. And Nathan said they liked to hang out, go to anime conventions, and they spent a lot of time together. When Elsie asked if Nathan and Shelley had a physical relationship, Nathan actually said no, which came as a surprise. But Nathan explained they had never become intimate or physical, that they were both virgins and hadn't discussed how or when that might change. Elsie was pretty dumbfounded because Nathan and Shelley had been together for 2 months at least, but supposedly they had never even kissed. So he asked why they hadn't done anything. He's like, you never fooled around, you never touched. And Nathan's like, nope. Elsie told Nathan that he had heard from Ashley that Nathan and Shelley would hang out in Shelley's room with the lights off. So he wanted to know, what were you doing in there? He actually asked Nathan that. And he said they were just playing video games. Elsie wanted to know if Nathan had ever tried to make any moves on Shelley and try to kiss her. And he said no. Elsie wanted to know why. And he said that Shelley was his first girlfriend. But the detective couldn't believe it. But there are many reasons why someone might not become physical yet. There's asexuality, celibacy, those things are real. And they were two shy people. But it just seemed odd to Elsie for 20-year-old college students. He wondered if maybe this was something Shelley didn't want, considering we know she told her mom she wanted to break things off with Nathan. Maybe this was the motive. So Detective Elsie said, Shelley told her mom that Shelley told you that y'all were through. And Nathan was like, no, she didn't say that. And he became acting very defensive. At this point is when Elsie gets aggressive and he actually yells at Nathan. He's like, don't call me a damn liar. Shelley told her mom that y'all didn't have anything in common. Now, Elsie might have been exaggerating a little bit because he's trying to pull a confession out of a potential suspect. That's when Nathan, he's just kind of mumbling to himself, saying she said that? Kind of like he's internalizing it and thinking about it in his own way. Now, in Elsie's defense, they do have these tactics that they're allowed to use. So if Nathan did know that Shelley was planning to break up with him, maybe this could help draw out that confession. But Nathan didn't confess. He didn't even react. In the footage, he just seems to be thinking and looking very uncomfortable. And Elsie noticed this, and he actually said that Nathan looked like a psychopath because he wasn't upset about finding out maybe for the first time that his girlfriend wanted to break up with him. Elsie was accusing Nathan of murder. And Nathan wasn't silent. He actually replied that nothing made sense to him. And he was just waiting to wake up. Nathan could have been in a disassociated state. He could have been grieving the loss of his girlfriend, or he could have been admitting to feeling out of control because he was guilty. I have to think that this lack of emotion was actually smart because he didn't have a lawyer at the time. But Elsie felt that all of this made Nathan much more suspicious. Now moving on to Nathan's alibi. He said he spent most of the week with his mom and his grandma in the suburbs. And then on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, Nathan didn't go to class so he could spend time with his family. On Thursday, he was back at the Art Institute. Nathan said he was in classes pretty much all day. And then from about 10 p.m. to 12 a.m., he was in the computer lab. Elsie also wanted to examine Nathan's body in case there was any evidence of him being in a struggle with Shelley. There didn't seem to be any wounds on his arms or nothing visible. So he asked him to take off his shirt, and Nathan complied. Now, his torso, Elsie noticed, was thin and pale, but he also saw multiple scratches across Nathan's chest and his stomach. It looked like they could have been from fingernails. Nathan said he didn't know where the scratches came from, but that he often scratched himself because he was a nervous person. And sometimes it also happened in his sleep. And I was thinking, yeah, right. But then again, I had to check myself because honestly, I get random scratches. I have one on my forearm, I have one up here, and I have one on my stomach. I have two on my stomach right now. Random scratches that turn into scabs, and they happen all the time. And I honestly don't know where they came from. So it is possible, but I'm not sitting in a police interview after my partner has been murdered. That's a difference. So this was just another thing that made Nathan their focus. Now, Elsie asked Nathan whether he had anything incriminating in his apartment. And to his surprise, Nathan actually says yes, but he gives permission for them to search his entire apartment, but he warns them that he's a collector. Nathan collected swords, knives, and other weapons. At that point, since there were 2 knives missing from Shelley's apartment, the investigators didn't actually think that it was going to be one of Nathan's personal knives from his collection used in this crime. But if he owned an assortment of knives, he probably knew how to use them. But then again, doesn't anyone know how to use a knife? Maybe saying that he would be more comfortable using a knife makes a little more sense to me. But Elsie wasn't done with Nathan yet, not at all. He brought out crime scene photos of his deceased girlfriend. This was a drastic move, but Elsie wasn't going to back down now. When he displayed the pictures, he said, "You know who killed that girl." And without letting Nathan speak, Elsie was like, "You killed that girl." But Nathan said he did not kill her. Elsie pressed him and pressed him, saying that he needed to tell him what happened. They were in that room for hours, but Nathan didn't budge. He said he did not kill Shelley, that he loved her way too much to do something like that. Or did he love her so much he couldn't bear to see her walk away from him? Now, Elsie did not arrest Nathan, but he did file for that search warrant. He also got a sample of Nathan's DNA before letting him go. It was late, but Elsie knew that both Ashley and Nathan were the people most likely to have easy access to Shelley's apartment. Ashley and Nathan were also close enough to Shelley to know her schedule, when she would be in class, when she would be asleep. In either way, time was of the essence, and both suspects were walking free. Now, Shelley's autopsy was actually completed the next morning just after 7 a.m., which I have to say was pretty fast. Medical examiner Dr. Reed Quinton found no evidence of sexual trauma and no signs of anything like ligature marks around Shelley's wrist or elsewhere. As usual, I am going to be covering some sensitive information. Now, Shelley had been stabbed with what seemed like 2 types of sharp objects, which were most likely both knives, 42 times. 42. This was overkill. The stab wounds were concentrated on the right side of her neck, but she did have multiple wounds on the left side of her neck, part of her back, and behind her head. The wounds were both shallow and deep. They were anywhere from less than an inch to 3 inches in depth, and they hit both of her jugular veins and both carotid arteries. Shelley would have passed quickly. It appeared she sustained defensive wounds to her fingers and bruising to her scalp from blunt force trauma to the head. Now, Dr. Quinton speculated that there could have been a brief struggle in the very beginning of the attack where Shelley tried to get up but was overpowered and her head was hit against the headboard. So Quinton also noticed that rigor mortis had since gone away. Now, rigor mortis sets in several hours after death and it lasts about 36 hours. This meant that on September 12th at 7 a.m., Shelley had been killed at least a day and a half prior. Dr. Quinton couldn't tell you the exact hour that Shelley had been murdered. However, there were signs of decomposition and it was possible that Shelley had been attacked on Wednesday, but it was more likely it was sometime in the day on Thursday, September 10th. So similar to what the detectives theorized, but maybe not as early as right after she went to sleep after closing her laptop. That was around 6 a.m. It was maybe closer to mid-morning. The same day on the 12th, the investigation continued with the search of Nathan's apartment in the Lake Highlands complex, which was about a 20-minute drive northeast of the Art Institute. Nathan lived there with his 2 roommates, Daniel and Allison. In Nathan's room, they found a very large collection of weapons. He had throwing stars, pocket knives, regular knives, switchblades, darts, daggers, and swords. He wasn't kidding. He had quite the collection. Now, Elsie immediately confronted Nathan, calling the collection an arsenal and asking, why do you need all these weapons? Nathan explained he was just a collector. What wasn't there were the missing knives from Shelley's apartment. Elsie moved on to the bathroom where Nathan got ready each morning. And that's when he sees something very peculiar right next to the sink. It's a clear Ziploc baggie with a smear of something red on it. As Elsie held it up, he noticed there were several blonde hairs inside this bag. And as he continued to examine it more and more, he thought that the red smear really looked a lot like blood. There was also a random feather found in the bathroom. Elsie looked to Nathan once again for answers, and he said he doesn't know why the feather's in his bathroom, but it could be from World of Warcraft. It's an online fantasy role-playing game, but Nathan liked to cosplay as characters from the game and do ritual practices with his friends, so they all owned feathers to put in their costumes. Then Elsie asked about that Ziploc bag, which was sealed, and Nathan said the Ziploc bag wasn't there on Friday morning when he got ready that day. He didn't know where it came from. When Nathan saw the Ziploc bag, Elsie said his personality changed. He shifted. He stopped complying. It was as though he thought the police had planted it there. And that's when he requested a lawyer before he answered any more questions, which is always a smart move for anyone that's being questioned for a crime, especially a murder. The Ziploc bag was sent to the Southwest Institute of Forensic Science, and analyst David Spence did a preliminary test, and he determined that that red smear was actually blood. The hairs had a similar texture and color to Shelley's hair, and Elsie was sure that they belonged to her. However, he wasn't going to make an arrest until he was 100% sure that it was Shelley's blood on that bag. The Ziploc bag was sent for a DNA test. Meanwhile, since Nathan had two roommates, they want to inquire about whether they knew where this baggie came from. Daniel, who was the main leaseholder of the apartment, said he had no clue. His bathroom was the primary one in the apartment. He didn't use the other one very often, and he hadn't been in there that day. He had never seen the bag. It was important for Nathan's roommates to give statements as well, so they were brought down to the police station and asked to confirm their own whereabouts, where Nathan had been the last few days, and to offer any additional information they had. They would also provide DNA samples and fingerprints. But there was someone else who had already been interviewed and confirmed Nathan's alibi. His own mother. I mean, relatives, they aren't the most reliable sources of information. But she said that Nathan spent Wednesday night at her house, and on Thursday morning, she dropped him off at the Art Institute. So maybe Nathan's story about being in class all day and in the computer lab from 10 to 12 a.m. on Thursday was plausible. But I've covered a lot of cases, and there have been times where mothers have helped their sons cover up murder. So was his mom telling the truth? Elsie talked with Jeremy Eldridge. Now, this was Shelley's friend who lived at the Falls as well. And Jeremy said that Wednesday night at 11 p.m., he and Shelley texted back and forth. Shelley was at home in her bedroom doing her hobbies and schoolwork. So Shelley's murder must have occurred on Thursday, which narrowed down the timeline. Shelley's own phone records confirmed that the last text she sent was at 12:22 early Thursday morning. Her computer, though, was active until 5:57 a.m. And I know to some people that might be strange, but like I explained, she liked to stay up really late, even into the next morning, because that was when the world was quiet and she could do her best thinking. She would have slept in on Thursday for the rest of the day because she didn't have any classes, and her own mother confirmed she did take prescription medication to fall asleep. Elsie interviewed administrators, students, and teachers. He wanted to know what people thought about Nathan. And the consensus was he was just a quiet art student known for his weapon collection and liking ninjas. He was obsessed with ninjas. He had a large collection of costumes for cosplaying as a ninja and role-playing. On his MySpace, he had posted pictures of himself wearing his ninja costume. And in one post, Nathan has a black ski mask covering his entire face except for his eyes. Now, this is a costume like a robber would wear, you'd see in the movies. And owning a black ski mask isn't something strange if maybe you live in cold weather, but they lived in Dallas. So again, investigators thought it stood out. I didn't, because I'm like, it's a costume. But then Elsie sat down with Daniel William. Now, this is Nathan's roommate that I told you is the main leaseholder. Daniel was from Indonesia. He also studied interactive media. He was 26 years old, so 6 years older than Nathan and Shelley. But that's because Daniel had gone into the Navy when he was younger. He was a pastry chef while he served, and then when he got out, he wanted to pursue his passion for photography. So that's what he was studying. He already had that apartment, and Chris Phillips was his former roommate. When he moved out, Chris connected him with Nathan, who was looking for a place to live when he enrolled at college. He decided to accept Nathan as his new roommate to contribute to the rent. Now, Daniel told Elsie that he and Nathan were friends, but he sometimes felt like he was Nathan's older brother. Because Nathan was babied a lot by his mom and his grandma. He didn't drive, he didn't own his own car, and he was used to someone taking care of him. So as Daniel got to know him better, he realized Nathan didn't mind asking for or accepting favors from others, including Daniel, who felt compelled to be there when his roommate needed him. Soon, it was just part of their normal routine. Daniel would advise Nathan how to do better in class. He would give him rides around town. And Daniel told Elsie he was happy to do it. But recently, things had changed. Daniel explained that he noticed Nathan was skipping classes, his grades were dropping, and he was concerned that Nathan, who had never had a girlfriend before, began prioritizing his new relationship with Shelley over his own college career. Daniel then went on to say that those around the couple believed that Nathan's relationship was part of the problem. And even other members of Shelley's friend group noticed that Nathan's behavior around Shelley was a bit obsessive. Daniel said that Ashley told him Nathan was coming over all the time like a stalker. He kept showing up at Shelley's place even when he wasn't invited. So Elsie wondered if this was part of the reason why Shelley wanted to break up with Nathan. Remember, she told her mom she thought that Nathan's feelings for her were deeper than hers toward him. Elsie asked Daniel how Nathan was acting on Thursday and Friday. Daniel explained that they had very different schedules on Thursdays, so he hadn't seen him in the day. But later that night around 10 p.m., Daniel said he picked Nathan up from school and they went back to their apartment. Nathan was upset. He was in a bad mood. And Daniel didn't really want to push it. Now, that's notably different from the story that Nathan told. He said he was in the computer lab from 10 p.m. to 12 a.m. Daniel also explained that later that night, right before he went into his room to go to bed, he noticed that Nathan looked like he was crying. So Daniel went to Nathan's door and he asked him if he was okay. Nathan said yes, and he was trying to hide the fact that he'd been crying, but his face was red and it was obvious. Then on Friday, Daniel said he saw scratches on Nathan's torso. I guess Nathan was walking around without a shirt on in the apartment, and Daniel was able to see this. As for what Daniel did on that Thursday morning, he said he stopped at Starbucks and he mentioned texting Shelley's roommate Ashley at the time, and they knew each other from both knowing Shelley. Then Daniel drove to White Rock Lake to take pictures for his photography class. He got all the way there when he realized he forgot his camera. He had left it at his friend Jessica's apartment. They had done another photography project together. So he drove to Jessica's at 12:30 that afternoon, but she wasn't home. So Daniel returned to his apartment at Lake Highlands. Just to do their due diligence, Elsie wanted to bring in Chris Phillips. This is Daniel's former roommate, and he wanted to ask him about him connecting Daniel and Nathan. And maybe he could provide some additional details considering he lived at the apartment and he knew both of these guys. Well, Chris said he used to live in Nathan's room. And it was true. When he moved out, he was the one who connected Daniel and Nathan. Chris even vouched for Daniel, saying that he was bright, friendly, generous, and a natural caretaker. He was the kind of guy who would walk into the student lounge and everyone knew him. Chris said Daniel was trustworthy, but they were just not a good fit as roommates. They had a great relationship for the first few months, but Daniel was a neat freak, and he often would get pretty mad at Chris for never pulling his weight around the house. Now, Chris admitted he wasn't the best at doing chores. He didn't like taking out the trash, doing the dishes. And remember, Daniel's older. He's been in the Navy, so you can imagine he's much more responsible. However, Chris said the issue was that instead of talking to Chris about it, Daniel just felt like he needed to take care of all the housework himself, and then he would resent Chris for making him do all the work. Chris became frustrated because Daniel had such high expectations, and it led to many disagreements. On top of the fact, Daniel was also particular about who could hang out at their apartment. There were just way too many rules for Chris, and he wanted to maintain their friendship, so he decided it was best if he moved out. Now, this had nothing to do with Shelley, but Chris said that Nathan and Daniel were going through a very similar pattern. Daniel did most of the chores, but it seemed as though he realized that if he complained to Nathan like he did with Chris, he's going to lose another roommate. So their arrangement seemed to work out a lot better. Now, side note, the fingerprints at the crime scene, including those on the patio door and the medicine cabinet, showed Nathan and his roommate Daniel were not contributors to any of these prints. But Nathan was still their number one suspect. And as the investigation continued, the Dallas Police Department could not be open with Shelley's family about who their suspects were. But as you know, people like to talk. At Shelley's funeral on September 17th, everyone gathered at Sam and Cynthia's Central Baptist Church. They were celebrating Shelley's life and her art. And Nathan was actually asked by Shelley's parents not to come. And he respected that request. But the very next day, Shelley's parents couldn't stop Nathan from coming to a public memorial that was held at the Art Institute. When Nathan saw Cynthia, he reached out his hand to try to shake hers. It was the very first time they would have ever met, but she could not touch him. She could not let her guard down because she didn't know if he had something to do with her daughter's murder, and rightfully so, because guess what? Those DNA results finally came back for the Ziploc bag. The hair and the blood belonged to Shelley Nance. Wow. So this cleared Ashley, and now they were even more focused on Nathan. They had also confirmed Ashley's alibi. And there was something else. Remember that blue piece of rubber found on Shelley's hand? It was determined to have come from a nitrile glove. Now, to investigators, this meant this wasn't in a moment of rage that this killing occurred. It was most likely planned because someone took the time to wear gloves before they killed her. Now, at this point, Elsie pointed out, this started a new investigation in and of itself because now they had to figure out where those gloves came from, who purchased them, and how they could link them to the murder. Unfortunately, none of the DNA found at the crime scene belonged to anyone else but Shelley. So they don't have a great starting point. Now they're going back over everything and everyone that they've already spoken with to see if there's anything else they can think of or anyone that dislikes Shelley, even the slightest bit, or if any of them had any other leads on Nathan. Now, during this time, they find out that Chris may still have a key to the apartment. So they go back to speak with him once again, and they get his alibi. But while speaking with him, they ask whether he was ever involved with Shelley. And that's when Chris basically says that he knew Shelley due to being friends with Nathan. But what they should really be looking into was a dynamic between Nathan and Daniel. Now that caught the investigators off guard. I mean, they already heard that he was like an older brother to Nathan, but Chris went one step further and said, no, that's not all. Chris said that Daniel had confided in him that he was actually gay. And Chris thought this was great that Daniel trusted him enough to be honest and comfortable sharing that. But in some ways, it made Chris feel uncomfortable because soon he noticed that Daniel wasn't just picky about who came over the apartment to hang out, but it almost seemed like he was jealous of Chris's other friends. And Chris didn't understand this because he actually confronted Daniel. He was like, do you have feelings for me or something? But Daniel insisted it wasn't because he was romantically interested in Chris. So Chris was confused why Daniel was upset when he'd go hang out with other people. It actually seemed like Daniel just wanted to be the most important person in his roommate's life, and he felt left out a lot. So that was another one of the reasons Chris moved out. Chris noticed that Daniel was now acting the exact same way with Nathan. Daniel would get jealous when Nathan hung out with other friends, and the word around their friend group was that Daniel wasn't a huge fan of Shelley. He actually referred to their relationship as toxic. However, Chris said he thought Shelley and Nathan had a really good relationship. So he wondered who could be trusted, Daniel or Nathan? Or could either of them be trusted? Did Daniel possibly know something about Nathan that he wasn't sharing with the police? Because maybe he was being that protective older brother figure. Investigators asked Cynthia if she knew Daniel. Cynthia said she had never met him, and he wasn't really close enough to Shelley to attend the funeral or anything like that, but she's heard of him. And that's because Shelley had told Cynthia that Daniel made her feel uncomfortable. At first, when Shelley and Nathan were just friends, they all enjoyed hanging out over Daniel and Nathan's place. Daniel would even cook food for everyone, and they all got along just fine. But then it seemed like as soon as Nathan and Shelley began getting closer, Daniel appeared to take issue with not being able to be involved in the activities they once did as a group. I mean, it's natural that a couple kind of pulls away to do more private things together, but Daniel seemed to be offended. He wasn't being invited out as much or invited to play games with them. And there were times when Nathan and Shelley went to breakfast or the movies, and Daniel was mad that they didn't even offer an invitation to him. Of course they didn't invite him. Nobody wants a roommate being like the third wheel on their dates. But Shelley and Nathan didn't know what to do, so they just tried to avoid it. There were times when Shelley would come over just to pick up Nathan, and they would go do something together, and of course they would avoid Daniel altogether. And Daniel considered that to be very rude. Even if he didn't want to go, he expected the couple to at least extend the invitation. So this becomes a point of contention, especially because before Shelley came along, Daniel acted like Nathan was a little brother. He would take care of him, get him up for class, cook, clean, do his laundry. But it was kind of overbearing and motherly. Now, Shelley was the one taking on the tasks. She was supporting Nathan, helping him, and Daniel's little pet project with Nathan was kind of over, and that seemed to bother him. Shelley even told her mom that she and Nathan were watching movies with the door closed in Nathan's room, and Daniel would literally barge in without even knocking, and she found that to be rude and an invasion of their privacy. So soon, she began inviting Nathan over to her and Ashley's place. However, Nathan seemed oblivious to Daniel's interference and encroachment on their time together. Shelley told Cynthia that Daniel was annoying. She described another time when she and Nathan were playing a video game in his room. Daniel kept opening their closed door and then just standing in the doorway making comments about their game and trying to essentially hang out with them while they were playing together. She couldn't figure out if Daniel was lonely or if he needed to supervise them for some reason. But she went on to tell her mom that she really did not want to talk about it with Daniel. But Daniel felt the opposite. He started asking Shelley if they could get together to discuss it. So Shelley ignored his request because she didn't think that her and Nathan's relationship was any of his business. And I have to agree. She was confused about why Daniel thought it was his place to try to control her boyfriend, what they're doing in their relationship. But when she tried to ignore Daniel's calls and texts, it seemed to make it worse. He was the type of person that if you did not answer, he would call and call and call like a stalker until you did. He even started coming up to her on campus, cornering her and saying, "We need to talk." The word around Shelley and Nathan's friend group was that Daniel would talk really badly about Shelley all the time behind her back. It was obvious that he did not like her, and no one knew why. He was always trying to convince everyone that she wasn't good for Nathan, and he wondered why he was the only one seeing it. It was hard for Nathan because he didn't like confrontation, and Shelley wanted him to say something, but Nathan was scared that Daniel would cut him off, kick him out of the apartment, and he didn't really think it was that big of a problem. But Shelley's mom knew it was a big enough problem that it was one of the reasons Shelley was considering breaking things off with Nathan. But it turned out she never did tell Nathan that she wanted to end things. Now that investigators have all of this new information, it seems like the only person known to dislike Shelley was Daniel. So was he really trying to be an older brother, or did he have feelings for Nathan? And what would give him a motive to actually kill Shelley? Even if it got to that extreme, there was one problem. Daniel didn't have a key to Shelley and Ashley's apartment. So unless he somehow climbed onto that second floor balcony without being seen during the day, he would have not been able to get inside. Plus, his fingerprints weren't on the door, so that didn't make sense either. But we know that the person was apparently wearing gloves. But still, there was no way for Daniel to know Shelley's schedule. They just weren't that close. In any case, Elsie got a search warrant for Daniel's car since, remember, Daniel was Nathan's primary mode of transportation. And then Daniel was brought in for a second interview. Elsie wanted to confirm Daniel's alibi and make sure every single minute was accounted for. Plus, He wanted to ask him more about the relationship between him and Nathan now that he knows a little more. Elsie asked Daniel if he had feelings for Nathan. And surprisingly, Daniel admitted that he did, but a long time ago, not recently, not now. But Elsie was like, well, if you had feelings for him at one point, you might still have feelings for him now. But Daniel insisted his current feelings toward Nathan were brotherly or fatherly in nature, not romantic. He repeated what others had said. He cooked for him. He gets him up for class. He drives him to school. But that kind of raised Elsie's suspicions that maybe Daniel was actually covering for Nathan, like he would with maybe his own son if he was being fatherly. But when they confronted him about that, Daniel said no. However, he did begin to open up, and he admitted he felt like Nathan and Shelley were disrespecting him, that they wouldn't invite him to come out with them, and it was the considerate thing to do in his perspective. Then the interview shifted, and Elsie wanted Daniel to go over his timeline for Thursday and go into detail. He said between 10:15 to 10:20 on Thursday morning, he was at Starbucks. Elsie asked where he went after that, and Daniel said to White Rock Lake, like he said in the first interview. But then he added something. He's like, well, I went to Walmart first, then White Rock Lake. But now Daniel was sitting here changing his story. He didn't mention Walmart the first time. So Elsie asked, why did you go there? Daniel said he went to pick up some hair dye to cover up his gray hair, which he did all the time with box dye. Elsie got the Walmart address, and then he asked Daniel about White Rock Lake. Daniel once again said he forgot his camera, so he went to his friend Jessica's house at the Falls apartment. But wait a minute. Jessica's apartment is at the Falls? That's a coincidence, because that's the same apartment complex that Shelley lives in, that Shelley was murdered in. And he was there at approximately, if not the exact time, that she would have been killed. So Elsie asked why Daniel conveniently seemed to leave out that part about the Falls. Like he was there on the day that Shelley was murdered. Now Elsie thinks that he's looking into the eyes of a killer. Well, Daniel has an answer for this. He said he didn't mention being at the Falls that day because he got mugged while he was there. He was afraid to go to the police. A robber wearing a ski mask and holding a knife approached him and stole his backpack, which had $40 in cash inside. But what was interesting is that Daniel never told anyone. He never filed a police report. And Elsie actually replied to him that he didn't tell him a damn thing about getting robbed because it's BS. He didn't get robbed. Daniel then covered his face. He started crying, and he was insisting he didn't do anything to Shelley. That's when Elsie took out pictures of Shelley deceased in her bed like he had done with Nathan, hoping to get a reaction. And Daniel just wailed. He covered his eyes and he refused to look at the photo. He insisted he was innocent and that Shelley was like a little sister to him. After this interview, Daniel's car was searched and they found a stain on the gear shift and it looked like blood. The car was then transported to the crime lab. Elsie was confident at this point that Daniel had done this. Or maybe Nathan and Daniel acted together. After all, remember, it looked like there were two knives used in this crime, but what would be the motive? And was Ashley involved at all? Detective Elsie felt like he knew less than he did when he started. So after 2 more days of collecting information, he sat down with Ashley again. And this time she's wearing a green long sleeve shirt and she appears a lot more calm and collected. Now, the subject of this conversation was Daniel. Ashley said that she and Daniel were friends, but over time, she started to distance herself. She felt as though Daniel made friends with her just to get to Shelley. She told investigators that Daniel reached out, telling her that he was concerned that Shelley was a really bad influence on Nathan, that Nathan wasn't paying attention to his schoolwork, and that Daniel wanted Ashley's help. He said he felt disrespected. He did all the cleaning, he did Nathan's laundry, made his lunch, and gave him rides. But Nathan was too wrapped up in his relationship to be grateful. Daniel had asked Ashley to try to stop Shelley from spending time with Nathan. Really? Ashley found this to be ridiculous. I do too. She had her own disagreements with Shelley, but she knew Shelley. And she knew that the opposite was actually true. Nathan and Shelley would spend time in Shelley's room, and Ashley talked to them on a regular basis. She told the detective Shelley encouraged Nathan to prioritize his schoolwork. She was a good influence on him. He used to skip school, fail classes, but all that changed when Shelley came along. He even made the honor list. It actually seemed like Daniel was mad that he wasn't the reason that Nathan was thriving. It's like he acted like he didn't have a purpose anymore. He even complained to Ashley that Nathan would ignore his calls when he was with Shelley. But it seemed so bizarre that he wanted to control a grown man and what he did and with who. Ashley was convinced that Daniel was the issue. His frustration with Nathan was pushing not only Nathan away, but their entire friend group. Shelley had made it clear to Ashley that Daniel was not her friend. He was dramatic, he was self-centered, he took things way too personally. And as Daniel's behavior escalated, Ashley said he would text her and ask if Shelley was home and if Nathan was there or when he left. Daniel wanted to figure out what Nathan was doing, and he wanted to know where he was at all times. None of this was his business. And I think that's really weird. I mean, it definitely sounds off. Remember how Daniel had made it look as though Nathan was stalking Shelley? Well, Ashley told Elsie that on September 9th, she found Daniel outside of their apartment and no one had invited him over. Ashley approached him and Daniel said, "Oh, I'm just here to see a friend, but don't tell anyone I'm here because I've got a restraining order." A restraining order. Ashley had never heard about this before, and neither did the detective. Ashley knew Daniel had several friends at the Falls complex, including Jeremy and Jessica, but they didn't have restraining orders against him, so that was another red flag. The next day, Thursday, September 10th, the day when investigators believed that Shelley was killed, Ashley said Daniel texted her to talk around 10 a.m. Then he spammed her with text message after text message. It was a message a minute. He was asking her things like whether she was home or at school and if she wanted to go grab breakfast that morning with him. Ashley told him she couldn't because she was in class. That didn't stop Daniel from texting. At one point, he said he was at Walmart getting dye to cover his grades, the same thing he told the detective. Ashley said he continued texting her even though she said she was busy in class. He asked her when she would be back home, and he was pestering her to hang out with him, even suggesting that now maybe they go to lunch together. He asked her about her plans for the rest of the day. But again, Ashley said, "I'm in class. I can't leave. I'm not going to lunch with you." But that didn't stop Daniel from continuing to try to make conversation. Daniel asked if Ashley would just please skip her class to go meet with him. Ashley said no, and Daniel began to beg her to skip class. At this point, Ashley felt that she was being harassed and he was crossing her boundaries. So she said no in all caps. She didn't want to see Daniel for the rest of the day. At 10:37, Ashley thought it was over. Daniel was silent for an hour and a half. But then at 12:03 p.m., he texted her again. And he continued to text her until 1:15 p.m. By 1 o'clock, though, Ashley had already finished lunch and gotten home back to the apartment after class. She told Detective Elsie that Daniel's behavior was unwarranted and unwanted. She didn't know why he was texting her the way he had on the day that she now knows is when her roommate was killed. It made him look really suspicious. Was he trying to create an alibi? Was he confirming she wasn't home so he could go commit the crime? Ashley wasn't sure, but she said for the rest of the day, she did not leave her apartment and she didn't see Shelley, even though she assumed that Shelley was home. Ashley left for class early in the morning on Friday, and we know the rest. The detectives have a lot of information to process, but they were still confused how Daniel could have gotten inside Ashley and Shelley's apartment to commit this crime if he did. So we asked Ashley if Daniel had access to a key. Now, after some thought, Ashley remembered something. It seemed really innocent at the time, but now it doesn't. A month prior, Daniel said he was having some car trouble and he asked Ashley if it would be okay to borrow her car to go pick up Nathan. Ashley said sure, and she handed over her entire key ring. It contained both her apartment key and her car keys. And she distinctly remembered the feeling of handing all those keys over because this was the first time that she let someone borrow her car and her keys like that. Within hours, Daniel returned the keys and the car, and nothing was out of the ordinary. But now, thinking about it, if Daniel had the keys for 2 hours. That gave him plenty of time to copy the apartment key, and that's scary. Elsie confirmed that on Thursday, Daniel had gone to Walmart. It was the closest Walmart to the Falls apartment complex. There is CCTV footage showing Daniel walking around the store. He picked up 3 items. At checkout, you could see a bottle of Zest soap, a box of hair dye, and a box of Rely-On nitrile gloves. His receipt and his debit card transactions confirm these purchases. The entire time Daniel walked through the store, he was on his phone, and we know he was texting Ashley. Elsie went to Walmart. He bought the same box of hair dye and gloves that Daniel had purchased. And what he found interesting was that the box of hair dye, most of us know this, had a pair of white gloves already inside to use while you're dyeing your hair. So why was Daniel purchasing an additional box of gloves? Well, to be fair, I do that too, but it's because the ones they provide are so thin that the dye still bleeds through on my fingers. But if he did this all the time, wouldn't he already own a box of alternative gloves at home? It just seemed odd, especially because they were also blue. And we know that tiny piece of blue glove was found on Shelley's hand. Chris confirmed that Daniel used box dye to cover his gray hairs, but it turns out he also had a latex allergy. There you go. That's the reason he had to buy latex-free ones. But the thing is, the white gloves in the box were latex-free. Usually they're made of a really thin plastic that remind me of the ones that the ladies from the cafeteria used to wear. So did Daniel just not want to use those type of gloves? Or maybe he didn't know they were latex-free? Well, Chris confirmed that Daniel never bought additional gloves when he dyed his hair. All the time they lived together, he never saw him purchase a box of gloves. So was he buying them that day for a different reason? A sinister reason? Also, the Dallas Police Department did not find a box of blue Rely-On gloves in Daniel and Nathan's apartment. So if he bought them to dye his hair on a continuous basis, why would he then get rid of a new box of gloves? Remember that Nathan had another roommate? She was a girl named Allison. Well, Elsie interviewed her to learn more about Daniel and Nathan. Now, Allison said Daniel talked to her about being mugged. Remember that story? He said outside the apartment complex, a black man that had a knife in his hand robbed him of his wallet and his backpack. And Daniel told Allison that the backpack contained a fresh pair of clothing. Daniel said that he was actually washing his car that day, and he didn't want to be wearing wet clothes on the drive home. So now he's saying that he was not there to grab his camera from Jessica's, but he was actually there washing his car in someone else's apartment complex? Allison also told the detectives that 2 days after the murder, Daniel confided in her that he was scared that he was going to be blamed for Shelley's death because everyone knew that he didn't like her. Elsie still didn't want to make an arrest until he had concrete evidence. The DNA results that they collected from outside the crime scene and other places that they swabbed took 2 months, and all the evidence was processed by forensic biologist Courtney Ferreira. I'm going to be as brief as possible, starting with Daniel's car. The stain on the gear shift, not blood. Shelley's DNA was not in the car. She had never been in his car, so that's no surprise. Shelley's apartment had several swabs that tested positive for blood, including the stains on the bathroom sink, the bathtub, the cabinet, and the kitchen trash can. I already told you they all belonged to Shelley. The blood on the bathroom sink and the blood in the bathtub did have a mixture of 2 DNA profiles of a woman that were probably Ashley and Shelley because they lived there. Now, the headboard and the blue material in Shelley's hand all tested positive for Shelley's DNA. An analyst, John Wachowski, in the Texas Crime Lab tested the blue material, and he compared it to 2 types of gloves, a pair worn by the first responders that came to the crime scene, and the Rely-On gloves that were from Walmart. From just a visual test, the paramedics' gloves were dark blue. They were too dark to match with this material found at the crime scene. But on the other hand, the Rely-On gloves had a similar color and texture. When he looked at the Rely-On gloves under a microscope, he found that the piece of glove found on the crime scene had the same texture as the Rely-On gloves, meaning they came from the same manufacturer. The color was a little different, but it could have been a manufacturing error, or they could have been 2 different styles of gloves. However, even with this information, he could not say for sure that the Walmart Reliant gloves were the same one used in Shelley's homicide. And there was no evidence of Nathan or Daniel's DNA at the crime scene. At the end of the day, they figured this was either Nathan or Daniel. So they got some surveillance footage and found out that Nathan was in the computer lab from 10 p.m. to 12 a.m. on Thursday, just like he said. And Nathan's phone records showed he did not leave the Art Institute Thursday morning, which means Daniel's story about picking Nathan up from school was a lie. If Daniel lied, we know he lied more than once at this point, there's nothing stopping him from lying more and more. All signs pointed to Daniel, and he was finally arrested on November 4th of 2009 in Dallas County, Texas. He was charged with first-degree murder. But it wasn't over yet. Now that an arrest had been made, Sam and Cynthia were given more details about the case, including the autopsy results, and they were horrified. Cynthia almost passed out when she found out that Shelley had been wounded 42 times. And then when they started to learn about who Daniel really was and his backstory, it terrified them that their daughter was exposed to such a possessive and scary individual. So let me tell you more about Daniel William. He grew up alongside his brother and sisters in Indonesia, and after his entire family immigrated to the U.S., he joined the Navy, where he worked as a chef in 2005. Now, during that time, Daniel acted out. He spoke with a Navy psychologist to unpack the irritation he was feeling. He told the psychologist he wanted to hurt his supervisors by splashing them with hot grease from a pan or attacking them with one of the kitchen knives. Daniel was promptly discharged from the Navy, and they were scared his behavior would escalate. Daniel had post-traumatic stress disorder and a history of passive thoughts of ending his own life. He also had fits of rage going all the way back to high school. He had taken a samurai sword and used it to destroy his own brother's bedroom. In the police report, the officer described Daniel's behavior as homicidal rage. But after this incident, Daniel appeared to be surprised by his own behavior, and that's scary. It's like he just snapped. He couldn't believe he could get to that point. These were the only reports against him, and Daniel did not have a restraining order against him at all. He apparently made that up, probably to keep Ashley quiet about him snooping around, planning to harm Shelley. Because that's a real reason he was there, right? But after Daniel's arrest, he insisted that he would hurt himself before he ever hurt Shelley. From his perspective, he kept asking Shelley to talk because Nathan was failing classes and he was just concerned. But the thing was, he wasn't failing his classes. Daniel was actually creating these stories in his own mind. Call this what you want. It could be obsession, cultural differences, manipulation, inability to communicate. But Daniel felt disrespected and he resented Shelley. Unfortunately, there was only one piece of concrete evidence and the rest was just circumstantial. The assistant district attorney, Hoyt Hoffman, investigated further to prepare for this trial. He interviewed Ashley and Nathan multiple times. He reached out to Daniel's friend Jessica to ask about their photography projects. She said she didn't even remember a photography project. After months of investigating, Hoffman actually felt like it would be just as easy to prosecute Nathan as it would be to prosecute Daniel. Nathan had a motive. He had a knife collection. He fit the stereotypical killer profile. And Shelley's DNA was found in his bathroom in that Ziploc bag. But nobody doubted Nathan's feelings for Shelley, and his phone records prove he was at school. Daniel had a clear vendetta. 2 years later, at Daniel's trial, Cynthia and Sam stared him down. Cynthia hoped that she was able to make contact with Daniel. She thought if he was innocent, there would be some way she could tell by looking in his eyes. Some way he would try to communicate that to her. But he didn't look at her at all. Daniel was a coward. He was in denial about his own horrific acts. Prosecutor Dewey Mitchell was convinced that he was the killer. He told the jury that Daniel was jealous about Nathan choosing Shelley over him. He was trying hard to find a way to break them up. But when nothing was working, he couldn't control the situation and his rage only grew stronger. Daniel purposely lied about his car trouble to borrow Ashley's keys so he could make a copy of the apartment key. Maybe at first just to spy on Nathan and Shelley, or maybe planned to get rid of Shelley all along. Perhaps he was just waiting for the right time to strike. The theory was that the anime convention was the last straw. Daniel wasn't invited, but he went anyway. And of course, he would have made it a point to find Nathan and Shelley. And when he saw them having so much fun together without him, Connecting through something they both loved so much, it was too much for Daniel to take. He was obsessed with Nathan. He was in love with him. They even found evidence that the real reason Daniel wanted to rent the room to Nathan was because he told people he thought he was hot. He knew Nathan would be gone that week visiting his family, and he was close enough to Ashley to get information about when she'd be coming and going. All he needed to do was case Shelley's apartment, and that wouldn't be too hard. The reason he kept texting Ashley was to make sure she wouldn't be there when he carried out this crime. They think Daniel made his way into the apartment around 10:30 a.m. on Thursday. Then using the copied key, he crept into Shelley's bedroom and callously attacked her sometime between 10:37 a.m. and 12:03 p.m. while she was lying there asleep in her own bed. This was pure rage. Her body was destroyed. It was personal and evil. She had no way to defend herself. When he was finished, he placed the thick comforter over her body, which would have concealed most of what he had done if someone were just to have merely peeked inside her room. Afterward, he used the bathroom inside the apartment to clean up and change, and then left and got rid of his backpack and blood-stained clothes, creating a cover story about being mugged. And then hours go by. Ashley comes back home that evening. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But of course, the defense has their own argument, which started with the fact that Daniel was already in a relationship at the time that Shelley was murdered. Daniel was dating a man named Ty. Therefore, the accusation that Daniel was jealous of Shelley and Nathan's relationship was unfounded. Daniel was happily in love. He didn't have a motive. The defense claimed that on Friday morning, when Chris picked up Nathan to go to the falls, Nathan didn't call or even text Shelley. He just hung out with his friends and didn't care to make sure Shelley was okay until Jeremy called. He was Shelley's boyfriend, yet he was out of town and didn't even check up on her when he returned. That seemed way more suspicious. But the prosecution witnesses testified that Daniel's phone records showed that he was the one involved in the crime. Daniel had told Elsie in the interview that after driving to Jessica's, he had gone directly home. But Daniel's phone showed he hadn't. After being supposedly mugged, which we know probably isn't true, Daniel drove 30 minutes north of the falls to a place in the remote wilderness area where he spent only about 10 minutes and then he left. This area contained a homeless encampment and a river. It's the perfect place to get rid of evidence like a knife, bloody clothing, a backpack. However, investigators had searched for Daniel's things there, but they couldn't find any evidence. So again, circumstantial. Nathan actually testified for the state. He said he had no clue that Shelley told Cynthia she wanted to end things with him. Nathan said if he had known that Shelley was having doubts and wanted to break up, he wouldn't have become angry. He would have just wanted to talk to her. But when Nathan was cross-examined, the defense made a compelling case against him. They blasted the photograph of Nathan in the ninja costume up on the projector, letting the jury know that he was just as likely to be the killer. Daniel's former roommate, Chris Phillips, also testified for the state. He admitted that he once asked Shelley on a date. Yes, he did. He admitted he liked her at one point. Shelley said no, but that he had no hard feelings about that. However, he did keep the key to Daniel's apartment after he moved out. The defense argued Chris could be just as likely to have a vendetta against Nathan for being with Shelley, and he could have planted the Ziploc bag in Nathan's bathroom to pin the murder on him. But explain how he would have gained access to Shelley's apartment. Chris denied that these things were true and he had anything to do with the crime. But then the defense brought forward Cynthia, Shelley's own mother, as their only witness, which I thought was pretty disrespectful. I know it's their job. I know she's subpoenaed to testify. But the fact that she was the only witness, it rubbed me the wrong way, especially since Cynthia thought that Daniel was responsible. Cynthia said that Shelley planned to break up with Nathan, but that Shelley never had that conversation with Nathan, and he didn't have a motive. The prosecution came through with evidence of Daniel's previous outbursts, and his ultimate plan went further than merely killing Shelley. He took blood and hair from the crime scene in that Ziploc bag to frame Nathan for Shelley's murder, because he knew Nathan would never have a romantic relationship with him. It was jealousy and payback, a senseless act, but it made sense. The murder weapon or weapons were never located, but there was so much evidence pointing to Daniel discarding them in that remote location. The jury deliberated and came to the conclusion that Daniel was guilty. He was convicted of first-degree murder on November 4th, 2011, and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. Daniel's defense attorneys appealed his sentence, of course they did, saying that the circumstantial evidence was insufficient, but his sentence was affirmed. His first chance of parole won't be until 2040, and I can't wait to read your thoughts in the comments. I'm shocked that someone would do something so extreme over a person they're not even in a relationship with, and over something that seems so trivial, but I don't have the mind of a killer. After the trial, Cynthia apologized to Nathan for ever suspecting him, and she thanked him for making Shelley's last days on Earth wonderful and meaningful. Looking back at all the cosplay pictures, it's clear that they had a lot in common. They had a really strong bond. Nathan thanked Cynthia, gave her a hug, and otherwise, he was quiet. And it does make me sad that this young man who just had an interest in martial arts and ancient weapons and ninjas made him the prime suspect in his girlfriend's murder. He truly lost someone he cared about, and I wish him the best in his career and his future. The Nance family still finds it a challenge to forgive Daniel. Cynthia hasn't been able to, especially because he won't admit he committed the crime. But Shelley's dad, Sam, has forgiven him. But it's because thinking about Shelley's death hurts Sam more than it does Shelley's killer. Sam thinks that everything happens for a reason, and one day he might learn the reason why Shelley was taken so soon. She will never achieve the success, the accolades, and even the fame that she deserved. The tree that Shelley's friends planted in their high school campus still remains strong, and Cynthia finds solace in the Shelley Nance Memorial Art Scholarship. It fundraises $1,000 every year to help an Italy High School graduating senior attend college for the arts. And while Cynthia, Sam, and Shelley were never big tattoo fans, Cynthia now has a tattoo of a green and yellow butterfly to honor Shelley's spirit. And Shelley's friends don't want her to be remembered as a homicide victim because she wouldn't have wanted that. That's not her legacy. Instead, remember her as an incredible person and an amazing artist. The Ellis County Art Museum and the Italy Community Center occasionally actually exhibit Shelley's work. Her art is timeless. She could have done anything and everything: digital art, painting, charcoal, pen, pastels, multimedia, and animation. And that's not even mentioning her brilliant poetry, prose, and blog posts. The next time you see a butterfly, and there's one right in my set in the background, because I love butterflies too, they're very meaningful, I hope you will think of Shelley. I'm so glad that I could give her a voice today. Thank you so very much for watching. I will see you in my next video.